Perfect.
So, hi everyone. This is Moshe. I'm just curious, how many people have seen me before, other than Ken?
I
Oh,
know Deb and Art have, but beyond that, I'm not sure.
all right. Well, nice to meet all of you, and glad to have kind of a wide open space to work in. Sometimes, half the people have seen me before, and then I'm always worried about losing half and boring half, and that creates some anxiety on my part. But so we're going to talk about some ideas relating to negotiation. And I really want to start off by telling you that I'm not here to teach you how to negotiate, because you all negotiate all the time. You all know how to negotiate. So what I hope that we can do is start a conversation around some of the challenges that you're observing, especially in today's market. And then I can share some thoughts with you relating to those challenges, and we can all talk about those things together. So I do have a PowerPoint, and I'm probably going to use it at various points. But I might not go through all of it, because based on what you bring to the conversation, I might find that some parts are more relevant than others, and happy to just kind of skip around and make this as relevant as possible for you. So I really urge you to be partners in this conversation with me. So I want to invite you to be as interactive as possible. So I thought it might be fun to start off with a scenario and see what that scenario triggers in you in terms of the kind of negotiations that you're involved with. So in preparation for this, I was thinking, you negotiate across the table with vendors and other people in the supply chain, but you also negotiate internally within your own organizations. And having spent a lot of time in this space, people have told me that very often those internal negotiations are actually more challenging for them than some of the external ones. So let me show you the scenario, and then we'll talk about it. And just so you know, I have my Zoom set up, so even if we're looking at the scenario, I can still see you. I know that only a handful of you right now have your cameras on. If you want to get into the conversations, it's easier and nicer if you are visible. And for the part of this conversation, I might actually put you in breakout rooms so you can talk to each other in small groups. But let me share, and we'll start talking about this scenario.
And Moshe, when you're ready for breakout rooms, let me know. I'll make you the host.
Excellent. So all right. So I'll read it with you, and then we'll talk about it. You just got an email from a senior scientist at your company, CC'd to the VP of R&D, saying, "We need you to negotiate a contract with WidgetCo by Friday to secure 8 of their gizmolators for our laboratory. I've attached the proposal from WidgetCo along with a contract they sent us. Their price of $14,500 per gizmolator seems reasonable to me. By the way, we've designed our product around their gizmolator, and no one else has a compatible or similar device. Theirs is the only one in the market. Thanks for getting this done for us in a timely manner." The researcher then called your assistant, reiterating the importance and urgency of this purchase to the company. When your assistant tried to ask questions, the scientist raised his voice and exclaimed, just get this done, okay? You contacted WidgetCo only to find out that they would consider this a rush order and that the price would now be $18,500 per gizmolator. So the question I want to put to you is, what makes this challenging? If this were you in this situation, what would you find challenging about it? And what, if anything, are some strategies that you might do to manage these challenges? And what I thought might be fun is that before we talked about it as a big group, I actually got you in smaller groups, about 4 or 5 people. You talk to each other, and then after talking to each other, we'll hear one idea from each group, and then we'll open it up to general conversation. So Ken, I'm going to stop the share. And now, if you can make me the host, I can set up the breakout rooms. We're only going to be in those breakout rooms for about 7 minutes. So All right, good.
Be
So,
sharing your presentation so that we can take a screenshot of that as well, the scenario.
oh, I am so ready for you on this. Here you go. Mhm. So you should be able to actually see it in the chat,
I love it.
and you can either download it or double click on it.
Yeah, if you double click it, it opens to full screen, at least on Windows computer.
Not my first Zoom rodeo.
I know you're good at this stuff.
All right. Well, we had this pandemic, you may have heard. So I got really good at doing it.
Olivia's gonna get a kick out of this. She knows I'm not great with breakout rooms and stuff like that. So I was talking to Moshe on the dry run on Monday, and he's like, "Just make me the co-host." He goes, "I'll take care of the breakout rooms." So you're in.
All right. So the breakout rooms have been created, and you're going to get an invitation to join them. And I'm only going to give you about 6-7 minutes in those breakout rooms, and we'll come back and talk.
Okay.
If you can still hear me, that means you're in the main room. So please join your breakout room. If you don't know how to join your breakout room, hit down at the bottom where it says more, and there's 3 dots. It should say join breakout room. And you'll be put in a room with some other people and have a conversation. If you can hear my voice, that means you're not in a breakout room. And if you'd like to go into a breakout room, either hit the join button if you see it, and if not, hit the 3 dots at the bottom where it says more, and that should give you an option to join the breakout room. All right, just waiting for everybody to come back.
Back. Like the poltergeist.
Mm.
Or Arnold. I'm back.
I'll be back.
I'll be back.
I
All
love
right,
it.
so I'm just curious what you discussed as some challenges that are brought up for you by this particular situation.
We had a fun group on this end anyway. We had 3 people, so I'll quickly tell you what we have for bullets I wrote down. So
Well,
the first
actually,
thing-
you know what, Ken? Why don't you just give me one bullet because I want to give other rooms an opportunity to give bullets too.
Okay, so I think you had asked 2 questions. One was, what's a big problem? Well, it's a single source, so we have very little leverage because they also know the how hot it is. And then some of the mitigations were, and I'll just read you 2 that we had was volume incentive agreement to recoup some of the dollars, early payment discount, and we wanted to separate out the expedite fee so the price wasn't affected to the customer.
All right. So one of the big issues is that you don't have a whole lot of leverage here, right? There's a single source and somebody's in love with them. And and in terms of remedies, some incentive agreement, maybe early payment, that kind of thing. And good. Others, I want to hear from other groups.
If I may speak up, but we had one of us brought up, when do they need this gizmo? What's the delivery date, required delivery date of this gizmo?
So to push back and find out when do they really need it? I know they're saying Friday, but do
the
they
actual
really?
delivery date, and then other things that were brought up is why do we have to accept this Friday deadline? Can't we go back to the internal customer and say why Friday, and why is this a single source, and challenge this?
So not accept that at face value. Go back to your internal customer and push back a little bit.
Yes,
Joyce, I
yes.
saw your hand was up as well.
Also on the single
sorry,
source deployment, because in a perfect world we like to go through a strategic sourcing process, like a 7-step process, and do competitive bidding, etc. Another point that was raised is, if this is really required by Friday, does the supplier know about this? Or can we establish a veil of competition and try to utilize it to our benefit? Then the question comes back, how do you negotiate? Do you make a counter offer? What would it be? Or do you negotiate with yourself when you do that? What other data is available?
So love it. So even though your internal client is imposing this Friday deadline, you don't know if the supplier knows about it, and you might still be able to have the ability of creating some sort of space for negotiation. And then the question is, how do you go about it? Oh, great. Those are great ideas. Joyce, to you.
I was going to say our team took not a different perspective, but like more of a holistic perspective. We tied into and really looked at how the senior scientist was acting in this scenario, not only to the researcher, but in the lack of information and all of that. So we just really looked at it from a kind of a culture standpoint. And the review of, yes, we have a supply chain scenario and an issue here, and of course that's important, but we have a culture issue here as well, in which people are allowed to talk to each other in that manner, and not address it, not give enough information. We felt we didn't have enough information. We don't know what the quote is. We don't know if, is there something that we can go back to Wigico, looking at the quote itself and, being able to negotiate something out of it. So we also weren't quite sure what our role is. How do I fit in with the senior scientist and the VP? Am I at a higher level or not? I realize I have an assistant, but all of us were like, we don't have enough information at one point. And that was a key part for us, getting more information, reading through the quote, maybe having a meeting with the senior scientist to better understand the expectations, because we thought that there was a lot of opportunity to recover here. From a situation that looks bad, we just don't have enough information on the full picture of what's.
To be blunt, I did only give you 1 slide's worth of information. So by definition, you didn't have a lot of information. And Michael, I'll get to you in just 1 second, okay? that what you're saying is that there's a culture issue, and there's definitely a culture issue. Now the question is, do you have time to address the culture issue now, or do you have to deal with the immediate gizmolator problem first and then go back and work the culture? And then there's a whole lot of unknowns, right? Where are you status-wise compared to this this senior scientist? I wish I could tell you that this was a fictitious example, and it is a fictitious example, but it's drawn from a lot of real scenarios. So this kind of situation where sourcing is put on the back foot is entirely too common, and I've seen it in a lot of different organizations. So yeah, so address all of those things, and I like your approach of looking for information. So, oh, sorry to hear that, Zach. I like the approach of there's a lot of unknowns, so the first thing you want to do is try to gather more information and do that largely through conversation. Great.
Any other groups?
I see, Mikhail, you have your hand up?
Yes, I actually would like to, to Joyce's point, I'm pretty much in agreement and in alignment with what she's proposing, like the gathering information, and we also talked about group activity is the one where he suggested to gather information. Definitely that is important, but I've dealt with this also a lot, and to me, communication is really essential. What really got my attention was that the VP and the other head were copied. So if I were the assistant who were to relay all the information that need to be gathered, especially with the pricing and everything, my thing is I basically would just go back, copying the top honchos, laying it all out what the pricing is, because in the end, whoever's going to purchase or pay for that would be the one who would be looking at it, and also the VP would be involved in it. So, something like this, especially with that kind of pricing, and I don't know what the threshold limit is, the scientist cannot just make any decision unless he can, in his own budget can pay for that kind of amount. But I don't believe so. It was not mentioned. So I would definitely go back after getting information, copying all the top honchos, and putting that scientist in his position.
So I like the reminder that you're not the one paying for this. Ultimately, you're facilitating the procurement, but somebody else is actually shelling out the dough. And if you can make it visible to the decision maker, if you can let them, help them understand what the parameters are here, that changes potentially your leverage, because when they see how much they're going to spend, that might impact your ability to push back on that senior scientist. And yeah, and I hear what you're saying, Robert, that yeah, you are the one paying, but at the same time, you might be able to enlist somebody else who has some clout to give you more leverage in pushing back, because your problem isn't WidgetCo. WidgetCo's fine. They just make stuff, right? Your problem in this case is 90% internal, and you want to straighten that out. Now, here's what I was really impressed with hearing all of your responses was how level-headed you all were, and how none of this shocked you, none of this put you on the back foot. This to you looked like it was like eating breakfast.
Every day. I used to have one person would do that escalation, but he would pull off a character off the emails. So you'd run around trying to make this happen, and then you reply back to everybody, hey, I got it. And then he had a whole bunch of emails kicking back. Those high-level managers were never on copy. It was just to push you to expedite it through.
So it sounds like, having been through the experiences, you're like, all right, we got this. This is not. So I guess my question for you is, if you do get a chance to, in addition to this, work with some more junior people and you're trying to bring them along, what kind of situations, or if you remember, can think of other situations, what kind of situations do kind of set you back so you have some sort of more visceral response to them? And when you've seen, the more junior people, what have you seen them get reactive to?
Moshe, I would say that when you said, if we say to them, you're not paying for this, so, but a lot of times they are paying for this, it's out of the engineering budget and they just want it. So we often have to escalate. We have to escalate above them and say, hey, talk to the VP and say, hey, this is ultimately going to impact your other projects because we're going to be taking money out of your budget too much for this one. And then they usually get involved and say, this is not acceptable. You can't have just this, this, and this. So anyway, that's an interesting situation we have sometimes.
Right. So whoever is in charge of budget, chances are they don't just want a gizmolator. They have other things that they want. They have other projects they care about. And again, to help make visible the trade-offs will help them make decisions that are consistent with you.
Whenever we negotiate, we try to speak in their currency. What is it that matters to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to share some thoughts with you, and stop me wherever you think it's interesting to stop me. And like I said, I'm going to set it up so I can actually still see you even though I'm presenting. And there we go. So the first thing I want to share with you is something called the emotional response curve. And the idea behind the emotional response curve is that anything that happens to you, anything anybody says, anything anybody does, any situation you walk into impacts you first on the emotional level. And emotions hit you pretty hard and pretty fast, and then they start subsiding. Meanwhile, your cognitive brain, the part that's going to figure out how to deal with the situation, is slowly ramping up. And only when those two curves cross are you once again a rational thinking human being. Up to that point, you're an emotionally overwhelmed person. And anything that you do or say in that top circle, you're likely to regret. I've made lots of mistakes negotiating, and almost all of them were in that top circle. That is the worst place to make any concessions, to make any commitments, or to do anything of significance in your negotiations. Now, this curve has, so to the right of the crossover point, you can respond to what's going on. To the left, all you can do is react, and you want to be responsive rather than reactive in your negotiations. Now, this curve has three very important implications. One is that different people have different triggers that send them into emotional overload. Something that bothers me may not bother you. Something that bothers you may not bother me. The better you know your triggers, the less triggering they are. And by the way, I find, and this resonates with what you said before, Ken, this helps me at work, but it really helps me at home because nobody triggers me more than my family members, right? So
True.
So the more aware I am of my triggers, the more likely I am to be able to catch them or prevent them from triggering me to begin with. Now, people have lots of different triggers and they come about for different reasons. One big source of triggers is time pressure. You do great until the deadline and then you lose it. Sometimes it can be authority figures, like you're fine negotiating with this person, but now this person walks in and you tighten up. It could be subject matter. You're negotiating with someone who's much more of an expert than you are. I do negotiation training for enforcement attorneys at the SEC. Do you know who they have the biggest problem with? Defense counsel that used to work for the SEC. Because if this person worked at the SEC for 20 years and then retired and went into the private sector, they know more about the SEC and its procedures and its intricacies than this poor new attorney that's been there for a year and a half. For some people, it's certain personalities that send them into overload or certain behaviors. A big thing that tends to set people off is surprises. Something unexpected happened that you didn't anticipate. Now, if you know your triggers, and one way to figure out your triggers is to look back at negotiations that you've conducted where you did something you regretted or you made a mistake. And I don't know if you have any of those, but I have a ton of those. And to think back to what happened just before you made the mistake, just before you did that thing you regretted. And chances are that was one of the triggers. Now, no matter how prepared you are, you're still going to get triggered. So the next thing you need to do is catch yourself at that point when you've been triggered, so you don't do or say anything that you regret. Fortunately, your body gives you some clues. Some clues that your body gives you that you're emotionally overwhelmed. Your heart rate goes up. Your breathing changes. Your muscles tense. Some people tremble. Some people feel hot. Some people feel it in their stomachs. Some people, it's cognitive. They go into brain freeze. They can't think. They can't speak. Other people go the other way, and they get into nervous stalking, and they start babbling incoherently and can't get themselves to stop. Some people get louder. Some people talk faster. You need to know what happens to you under stress. And when it happens, the signal to you is to stop and slow down time so you can get to that crossover point before you do or say anything of significance. How can you slow down time in a negotiation? Well, one thing you can do is just say nothing. As you well know, silence is your friend. And if you're not saying anything at all, you're not saying anything you're going to regret.
Moshe, this is one of the points that I take with me and use all the time from one of your earlier presentations. You have to be comfortable with silence. A lot of people will, you're saying something that you need, and they're waiting for you to say something that'll give them an out. Oh, no, I can't do that and they don't have enough info from you. So they just sit and, so I'll just sit there and look, total silence. I'm perfectly fine with it because I'm not going to sink my own boat, thanks to your tip.
Well, thanks, Ken. And I gotta tell you, silence is uncomfortable for a lot of people. We'll talk more about it in a little bit. But here, it's just simply that if you don't say anything at all, you're not going to say anything you're going to regret. I can think of lots of times when I spoke in haste and regretted it. I can't think of any times when I didn't speak in haste and regretted not speaking in haste. So a few years ago, I had one of the easiest sales calls of my life. This guy I worked with at one company left his company, went to a new company, called me up and said his boss, the VP of sales, wants to do a negotiation training. And he set up the call between me and his boss. Now, in my world, doesn't get easier than that. They know they have a need. I have a warm internal contact who's already set up the call with the decision maker. All I need to do is get on the phone and not blow it. So let me tell you how I blew it. So I get on the phone with the VP of sales, and I instantly didn't like him. I found him arrogant, which turns out that's one of my triggers. And then at one point, he asked me a question I didn't like. He asked me for a discount, but the way he asked me for a discount made me feel disrespected, like he didn't value what I did. In that moment of feeling disrespected, my emotions shot up, and I said something that I probably shouldn't have said, along the lines of, I only give discounts to my special customers. And that second, I lost the sale. How much better off had I been had I just zipped it for 10 seconds? Because I guarantee you, 10 seconds later, whatever I would have said would have been smarter than that. The bar was pretty low. Now, in addition to staying silent, some other things you can do is call for break. Right? The words, thank you, let me get back to you, are really powerful. Think of how much pressure negotiations put you under. And if you disengage, you can regain control of yourself and regain control of the negotiation. One of my favorite things to do is, instead of responding to the other person, I acknowledge what they've said, and then I ask them questions to turn the floor back to them. While they're talking, I'm also calming down. Right? Oh, thanks for sending over this contract. The first couple of clauses make sense to me. The third one, I really don't understand. Could you run through that? While they're running through the third clause, I'm also calming down. Something else that I always do is I take notes when I negotiate, partly because I have the worst memory in the world, but partly because I can't write as fast as I talk. So writing things down slows me down. It also gives me a place to refocus if something throws me off. See, because I found that this curve, this emotional response curve, has been a game changer for me, because I've got really good skills, but I'm also emotionally pretty volatile. I get angry, I get frustrated, I get excited. And, all these emotions are things that will drive you into making decisions that you regret. And learning to slow things down. And I do a lot of negotiation coaching, and two of the words I say more than any other when I'm coaching people are slow down. Now, I mean, because, my sense is that many of you here are very experienced at what you do. Try to think of this also through the lens of coaching other people in your organization that you're trying to help along and grow them as professionals in this field. Now, the last thing I want to say about the emotional response curve is that sometimes this isn't you. Sometimes it's the other person. And generally, when we set people off like that, we do it by accident. We tell them something they don't want to hear. We give them bad news. Imagine you had to call up the senior scientist and say, you know how you wanted this by Friday? Totally not happening. And we might not even get your widget go anyway. They've exploded on you. And now you have some ideas of how to move forward on this. And you don't like it when people explode on you. So you want to share these ideas. The only problem is that when people are in the top circle there, they can't hear you. And they're going to devalue everything you say. So you have to work them down to a better emotional place and then talk about how to solve the problem. How do you work somebody else to a better emotional place? Well, you use some of the same tools you use for yourself. You stay silent, you ask questions and listen. You can offer them a break. If you do offer them the break, don't do it by saying, you're looking a little stressed out there. Why don't we take a break? All right. Nobody likes to be called on it. You be the one who needs to make a phone call or check your notes or something. Really, you're doing it for them. So any questions or thoughts? I don't know if this resonates with anyone, but I just find that this thing, it happens all the time. This is all about managing moments. And I believe that life happens in moments, and you can have a great negotiation go completely south in one moment. So
Moshe, I would say that with one of the things resonated. I used to have a boss who he'd say, I want this done. And you'd be like, all right, I don't think we want to do it the way he's saying, but you can't start with that. At least in my opinion, with that kind of an emotional person, you have to start with, yes, I'm going to do it. And I have some thoughts maybe on how to do it, because then they're listening. Because I found that in the past, my boss would be like, is he going to do it? Is he going to do it? He's not listening to anything I'm saying until I say I'm going to do it. And then he's willing to listen. So when they're emotional, you're right. They're not listening at all.
Right. So what you did is by saying I'm going to do it, you diffused his emotion, and then you can say, and I have some questions, and now you're in conversation and you can regain control of that situation. All right, great. Anybody else before I move on?
Yeah, just I really like this this topic bringing up, and it reminds me that an emotional reaction can also beget another emotional reaction. So even on your side, when you react a certain way, you could also elicit, poor negotiation from your counterpart as well.
Right. And so two things on that. One, I think you're describing my house where we just mutually escalate each other until everybody walks off to separate rooms. But two, emotions aren't bad, and escalating isn't always bad. What's bad is being out of control. Right? Sometimes showing emotion can actually be a very powerful thing. Right? If you feel like someone's crossed a red line and you need to put them in their place and make sure they back off, showing emotion can be really powerful that way. But you want to make sure that you're still in control, that you're not completely just going off on them without having any ability to manage. All right, good. So I'm going to share some other thoughts with you. And again, you can stop me at any time because this is all really just thoughts I share. So
Moshe, I'll share what I was going to say on, I just want to let you know, I find, because I am an emotional person, and, early on in my career, I realized I could not maintain the level of, emotional intensity that it was causing to me. I find that my reaction and my acknowledgement of it changes in the situation. If I'm in a business environment, I swear my reaction time is 3 seconds, enough to acknowledge it, be aware of it, and go on with, a 3-second wait time in terms with the response. And I don't feel that emotional response after 3 seconds. In a home and a family environment, I can't, with 4 sisters that I'm not the alpha on, boy, I'm telling you, I think it can last for days. So I think that I also have to be very aware of the time aspect of this and find ways to improve that.
Yeah. And I think, the most important about all of this is the awareness, right? So this really comes out of the theory of emotional intelligence. And, and the two cornerstones of emotional intelligence are self-awareness and self-management. And you can't self-manage unless you're self-aware. So hopefully this helps you do both of those things. And, we're all a work in progress. So, I mess up more than I succeed, but I succeed more than I used to. So, I feel like, that's what we're really aiming for. So, and that's a great point. Let me talk like an engineer for a moment, because I used to be one. The amplitude of that initial spike, the attenuation rate of that, of that decrease in emotion, and also how quickly your thinking brain catches up. All of those parameters change from circumstance to circumstance, and change as you become more experienced and more mature in the field that you're working in. So, and absolutely. And, the family, like I said, in my case too, the family environment is the one that I find the most challenging. And one of the things I'm hoping with all these tools is that as you work with other people, it gives you some language that you can use to help them get through whatever it is, whatever struggles they're getting through as well. I can tell you that my kids actually use this to calm each other down when they start escalating. They all know this model, and they're like, okay, you're here. Let's take a break and come back when we're down here. So they know how to say these things now, and having a language helps you do some things. All right. So in a longer term sense, just some things to notice that we very often negotiate out of some fears. And you can break down negotiation fears into three categories. One is a fear of tangible hurt. Something bad is actually going to happen. The senior scientist is going to complain to the CEO and I'll get fired, right? Something bad is going to happen. Second is relationship damage. The VP isn't going to like me anymore. And the third one is emotional pain. Someone's going to make me cry, or someone's going to make me feel bad. Now, it turns out we don't like pain. So we tend to move away from pain. So if you look at the impact of these fears, number one is avoidance. We know we need to do something, but it looks like it's going to be painful, so we just don't do it. Or we put it off as long as we can. The second one is actually rushing through it once we start, because if you're doing something that causes you fear, well, then you rush through it. So I'm a pretty avid kayaker. And my friend Mike and I decided to kayak last summer from Boston to Gloucester. Some of you know what that means. And there's this right at the entrance to Gloucester Harbor, there's this place called Rafe's Chasm, which for some reason scared the heck out of me. I have never kayaked so fast. I was trying to get through Rafe's Chasm as quickly as I could. But the problem is in negotiation, when you rush, that's when you make mistakes. So if you're afraid that this situation is going to be uncomfortable and you rush through it, you're more likely to be error prone. And the third thing we do is we give away stuff we didn't need to give away, because we're afraid the other person won't like us, or we're afraid that somehow we're going to get hurt. We make concessions we didn't need to make. And those are the things that bad. Having fears, that's normal. We all, squirrels have fears. Fear is a part of our just mental makeup. But the question is, are they driving the bus? Are we letting our fears dominate and drive our behavior, or are they just there in the background and not in control? We are still in control. Our fears tend to get amplified in certain situations. Conflict is a huge one. I can't tell you how many people say to me, I hate conflict. I don't like conflict. I'm afraid of conflict. And then you ask them, what about the conflict? And it turns out it's almost always tangible hurt, relationship damage, or emotional pain. If I get into conflict, she's going to hit me. If I get into conflict, she's going to make me feel bad. If I get into conflict, she's not going to like me anymore. And now the conflict amplifies whatever fears you came in with. Another big one's uncertainty. Do you ever wonder why almost every kid in the world is afraid of the dark? It's because they can't see what's there. And what we can't see, we can imagine. And we can imagine some pretty scary things. And the problem is that negotiations are inherently uncertain. You never know how they're going to turn out at the beginning. You never know what kind of tricks the other person's going to have up their sleeve, what information they have, what power they have, what are they going to do, how it's going to turn out, none of that. And that uncertainty makes people anxious. And the third one is power perception. If you perceive yourself to be at a lower power position to the other party, well, then now you feel like they can inflict tangible hurt, relationship damage, or emotional pain on you. Now, power is an interesting thing in negotiation, because very often we tend to overplay the perceived power that we give the other person, and we tend to underplay our own power. If you ever feel like you don't have power in a negotiation, just ask yourself, why is the other person negotiating with you? And why is that? Because there's something you have that they need. If they really didn't negotiate with you, they wouldn't bother. So the fact that they're talking with you means that you have some power. So don't downplay your power. Now, our fears and our stress factors are largely caused by our narratives. We tell ourselves stuff all the time. We tell ourselves stuff about ourselves, about the other party. We tell ourselves stuff about the situation. And what we tell ourselves has a profound impact on how we feel, what we do, and how we interact with other people. If I go into this negotiation saying, I have no power here because the senior scientist is buddies with the VP, well, now I don't have any power. I can no longer negotiate because I've completely psyched myself out of the game. Right? Or if I go in there saying, oh, well, we really need these gizmolators, well, now I have no power in my negotiation with Widgetco. What we tell ourselves is often completely dissociated from the reality, but the fact that we tell ourselves that makes it our reality. See, in life, there's what happens to you, but then there's your story about what happens to you. And your life experience is actually more driven by the story than by what actually happened. So if you're going to be able to manage your response to situations, you need to learn how to manage your stories. And the way to do that is, first of all, to become aware of what they are. A lot of times when I'm coaching people in negotiation, I'll be like, all right, stop. What are you telling yourself right now? And it's unbelievable what comes back. Right? People tell me, oh, I'm a terrible negotiator. Well, all right, you just became one because you told yourself that. Or this person has all the power. Well, that just became true. Or this person's a jerk and I have all the power and I don't need to negotiate with them. Boy, are you going to get blindsided. So you need to identify your stories. And if you can't do that yourself, buy somebody a cup of coffee, have them ask you the questions. They'll help you uncover your stories. Then you want to find out, what's the impact of these stories? And what do you actually know? And honestly, a lot of times when we ask ourselves, what do I actually know? The correct answer is not much. Have you ever said to yourself, oh, they'll never agree to that? How do you know? Until you test the waters, you never know if they're going to agree to it or not. But once you tell yourself they'll never agree to it, you're not going to ask. So the final thing is that these stories exist entirely in your own mind. You're making them up. So make up different ones. You can say, you can say one story that describes a situation, but a completely different story might also describe the same situation. I run a company of one person. Some of my clients have 30,000 people or more. It's very easy for me to go in there thinking, I'm just the little guy. I'm going to have to accept whatever contract they give me. Well, if I do that, I've completely disempowered myself. Or I can say to myself, there are thousands of negotiation teachers in the world. And of all of those teachers, they picked me. That means I have some leverage here. Two different stories, same facts. And one of them disempowers me, one of them empowers me. I'll give you one other cute little example. So a friend of mine called me up and she said, I'm terrified. I have to speak in front of 500 people at a conference. I've never done that before. I'm like, all right, what have you done before? And she said, well, I do a lot of public speaking, but never that big an audience. I'm like, all right, how's that different? And she's like, oh, it isn't. And the moment her story changed from, I've never done this before, to this is exactly what I do all the time, all her fear went away. And the only thing that changed was her narrative. That's how powerful this is. Again, sometimes working through narratives, it's easier if you do that with other people. All right, I'm just going to keep going because there's so much stuff I want to share with you, but feel free to stop me at any time. This, like I said, I'm always happy to make this into conversation. I don't care if I cover all my material. So There's a model called the Thomas Kilmann model that describes different negotiating styles, depending on how much you care about the outcome versus the relationship. If you're all outcome focused, you're competitive. If you're all relationship focused, you're accommodating. If you're both, you're collaborative. If you're somewhere in the middle, you're compromising. And if you really don't want to negotiate, you're avoiding. When I looked at this model as I was writing, so I don't know if I mentioned this, but my book, Collywobbles, How to Negotiate When Negotiating Makes You Nervous, came out in 2020. And when I was writing Collywobbles, I realized that the Thomas Kilmann model is really good at describing what you should do, but not as good at describing what you're likely to do. So I added 2 parameters to it. One of them was time orientation. Are you emotionally more focused on what's happening right now, or are you emotionally more looking down the road? Because if you're focused on right now, you're trying to compete to get the best outcome right now, or what you really want now is not to deal with it, in which case you're going to avoid. If you're focused down the road, then what you care about is either creating the most value, which is collaboration, or making the other person happy, which is accommodating. The second parameter, though, is the one I really want you to pay attention to. And that is that both competing and collaborating require a lot of energy. I mean, imagine you now have to go into this meeting with the VP and the scientist, and widgets go on the other side of the phone too. How much of your energy is this meeting going to take? Probably a lot. And we don't always have that energy. So the first thing is you try to optimize your energy. Schedule your most difficult negotiations at the time of day that you have the most energy. If you can. You can't always do it. But if you can, make smart decisions. So because I'm a morning person. So, I'm usually best like between 8 a.m. and noon. Then between 2 and 4 is what I like to call nap time. And, I don't often get to nap, but it really should be nap time. And my brain is certainly napping, even if and then I get a second wind later on. The second thing, though, and this is really important, is that your energy level actually doesn't stay constant through a negotiation. Usually it starts pretty high. And then as you get tired, it starts dropping off. I've mediated day-long cases. And I got to tell you, people negotiate with each other really differently in hour 1 and hour 7. Hour 1, they're like, let me at them. Hour 7, they're like, make it stop. And they start giving away stuff just to have it end. Well, if you're giving away stuff just to have it end, that's a clear signal to you that you are no longer in mental or emotional shape to negotiate this, and you need a break. And it's not a shame to take a break. It really feels bad to give away stuff because you're exhausted and then wake up the next morning and think, what have I done? Because then you often can't take it back. All right, I hope some of this is resonating with you because we've all done these things. Now, just a quick reminder, when you have a negotiation, you have your limit, which is your alternative. They have their limit, which is their alternative. The zone that is feasible for both parties is the zone between those limits. So let's say WidgetCo can really go down to, let's say, 12,000, and you really can go up to, let's say, 14,000. Between the 12,000 and the 4,000 is where a deal can happen. Now, zones of agreement come in 2 flavors, big and small. When the zone of agreement is very small, it's often very difficult to find, and those negotiations take a really long time. When the zone is big, your challenge isn't to find it. Your challenge is to place yourself as favorably as possible within it. So let's pretend that the zone was really between 10,000 and 20,000. Maybe WidgetCo is happy with 10. Maybe your VP can go up to 20, but you don't want to go to 20. You want to push it as close as possible to the 10. Now your challenge is to place yourself as favorably as possible within that zone, not necessarily to find it, because finding it's kind of easy. Sometimes when finding it's easy, we get complacent and we don't push as hard. And then you need to decide, how important is it for me to maximize my value in that negotiation? In terms of maximizing value, one of the things that I find is that people self-limit. They say, well, I want to ask WidgetCo to give us these gizmolators for 8,000. But I don't want to kibosh this deal, so maybe I should just start with 10. And the lowest number they started with was 14, so maybe I'll just start with 12.5. What just happened? I just negotiated myself twice before even saying hello to WidgetCo. Again, this happens all the time. And the problem is that you negotiate with yourself and then you aim too low. And if your starting number ends up inside the zone of agreement, by definition, you've given away value in the negotiation. So if the zone of agreement really was between 12 and 14, and you started with 13, are you getting these gizmolators for 12? Not today. And here's the really sad part. You did it to yourself, just with your starting number. So especially when I'm working with more junior people, but it's a good reminder for everybody. It's just a reminder to take the chance, learn to hear the word no, learn to think of no as the start of the conversation rather than the end of the conversation, and push just a little bit harder, take that risk. And that doesn't mean, I mean, if you ask for too much, sometimes the other party will walk away, but not as often as you think. Again, why? Because you have something they want. And even if they hate your starting number, very often they'll stick around to see if they can get you somewhere they're happier with. Now, very often you're negotiating with people that it's not just about a number. You're negotiating a whole set of parameters and potentially a relationship. I mean, if you're negotiating with one of your vendors that then your company will work with over a long period of time, it's not just about killing them on the deal, right? We want to negotiate something that'll be good for both parties. And if you're going to do that, you need to understand what both parties need out of this negotiation. Back in 1980, a very famous book came out called Getting to Yes. Getting to Yes was written by Roger Fisher and Bill Urey. I'm sure many of you have read it. If you haven't, you really should. It's a short read, and it's a really good read. It was kind of revolutionary in the negotiation world when it came out. The main concept in Getting to Yes was that if you and I are going to negotiate effectively, we need to move away from what each other says we want and into an understanding of the needs, motivations, and fears driving the other party. Sounds kind of simple now, but it was really revolutionary when they said it, and it's still very difficult to do, because the problem is when you're negotiating with people, they don't want to tell you what they need. They don't trust you. And sometimes they don't even know what they need. So it's a process to get there. When it comes to positions and interests, two things are very important. One, you need to know what your interests are. And that's actually very complicated, and it's especially complicated for people in your position, because very often you're not negotiating on your own behalf. You're negotiating on behalf of a complicated set of actors: the scientists, the finance people, the potentially operations people. You have a whole lot of characters that you're representing. You need to understand their interests so you can negotiate effectively to maximize that set of interests. And more importantly, you need to focus on understanding the other party's interests. If you're, let's say, talking to the scientist, you need to find out what they care about. Or if you're talking to WidgetCo, you need to know what WidgetCo cares about. And that's really hard to do, because very often they don't want to tell you, or they don't know. So if your success comes from understanding people's interests and they either don't know or don't want to tell you, well, then you've got to get quite good at drawing those interests out. And the tool you use to do that is called the listening triangle, which is a tool I came up with way back in the early 2000s when I was teaching mediators how to understand what people need in mediation. And that starts by asking short, non-judgmental, open-ended questions. Questions like, what's going on? What happened? What do you want? What else? Like what? And so now what? Tell me more. Why not? Right? When you ask those questions, the other person will talk, and they'll tell you a lot of stuff they wouldn't have told you otherwise. And by keeping the questions short, you are much more effective at keeping your judgments and opinions out of the questions. You're a lot less likely to be leading in those questions. Once you ask those questions, the next thing you need to do is suffer through the uncomfortable silence that follows, because you need to give them time to kind of roast in your questions and think and eventually answer. If you utter a single syllable, they never have to answer your question. So you need to learn to ask these short, open-ended questions and just sit there and let the other person get there. Once they start talking, you need to listen. That's so easy for me to say. That's so hard to do. What are we usually doing instead of listening? Sometimes we're talking. Often we're thinking about what we want to say or our next brilliant question. We're multitasking. We're judging and filtering what they said before, and we're just plain distracted. But the problem is if we don't listen, we can't hear their interests. And we need to hear their interests, because their interests give us leverage and power in the negotiation. The better I can get into your mind, the more effectively I can negotiate with you. If I'm not listening, I can't do that. Once you've heard whatever it is you've heard, you need to reflect it back to the other party. First of all, you want to confirm your understanding. You want to make sure you got it right. You also want to acknowledge them, let them know you're listening. You want to let them hear themselves, because sometimes when you say what they said, that's going to change their perspective. Reflecting back also buys you time, because as you're reflecting back what they said, you don't have to say anything of your own. But my favorite reason to reflect back is because you can't reflect back if you didn't listen. And knowing I'm going to reflect back makes me focus, makes me listen better. There's 3 ways to reflect back in a negotiation. 1, by parroting back the other person's exact words. The advantage there is they get to hear themselves. The disadvantage is that it's really annoying if you do it too much, and it doesn't confirm understanding. The second way is to paraphrase, change the wording. That's good because it's much more conversational and it does confirm understanding. My favorite is reframing, which is you hear whatever they said, you take an educated guess at the interest behind it, and all you reflect back is the interest. Right? So if, let's say, you offered me a price and I said, you're cheap, right? You could parrot that back to me, we're cheap. Or maybe you paraphrase, we're stingy. Or you could reframe it to my interest and say, so you're looking for a fair price. Notice how that shifts the focus from you back to me, and from positions to my interests. And then you need to ask another open-ended question. Just a couple more thoughts, and then I don't know how much time I have, but I think I'm coming to the end. I forget when we're done.
You still got a few minutes, and very few people have dropped off. This is really great stuff. So,
all right, well, good. So I got to tell you, the listening triangle is the tool I use the most. I use it when I mediate. I use it when I teach. I use it when I negotiate. Nothing works better in terms of de-escalating situations. When somebody comes at me, I go into listening triangle mode, and that seems to just calm everybody down. People like to be listened to. I'm not giving away anything by it, because I'm not agreeing to anything. I'm just validating you and letting you know I understand you. And 2 words I really want to attach to this are curiosity and empathy. I'm very lucky. I'm an incredibly curious person. Anything you say to me, I'll be like, I want to know more. But, I really urge you to connect back to your childlike curiosity, and anything anybody says to you, really just use this listening triangle to dig and see what else you can find out. But the empathy part is demonstrating to the other person that you get it. Not that you agree with them, not that you feel bad for them. It's not sympathy. If somebody says, we need this price because, well, we need to have enough money to pay our bills. And you go, so it sounds like cash flow is a real issue for you. And they go, yeah. Now they feel like you get them, and now they become much easier to work with.
By the way, Moshe, I will say that sometimes what people are asking for is absolutely crazy. And when you say you understand it and you reparrot it back to them hearing it makes them sort of realize it sometimes, like, oh crap, that's how they're perceiving it. That doesn't sound very good. And sometimes that'll allow them time to reframe or make them want to reframe.
Oh yeah. So absolutely. And that's the power of reflecting back, that sometimes it really changes their perspective on what they're saying. So let me just share a few more thoughts, and then I'd rather just ditch the PowerPoint and just have a conversation about these concepts or anything else you want to talk about. So based on this concept of interest, there's this entire collaborative framework. And this framework is based on the idea that there's 2 ways we can meet our interests in a negotiation. 1 is by coming to an agreement with the other party, and 2 is by not coming to an agreement with the other party, right? When we're negotiating with each other, either we'll make a deal and find an option that works for both of us, or you'll go to your alternatives and I'll go to my alternatives, and we'll meet our interests on our own. And that's a really important thing to remember, because all negotiations occur under the shadow of the alternatives available to the parties. Right? I mean, one possible thing is right now that senior scientist is saying, hey, there's no alternative. We need this gizmolator. Right? But if you go back to them and say, we needed to redesign your system so you don't need a gizmolator. Now, all of a sudden, you have all sorts of power. Right? So having alternatives is one of the things that gives you power in negotiations, and being willing to go to them. In the book, I call it jumping out of the plane, because yeah, in theory, you can jump out of the plane, but are you willing to actually do it? Right? So When it comes to alternatives, a few things. One, you always have alternatives. Even when you feel like you don't have alternatives, you have alternatives. That just means they're all really bad. You still need to know what they are. You still need to know which alternative you'll go to if you can't come to an agreement with the other party, because there's always the possibility you might not come to an agreement. They might be so unreasonable that you can't. And then what are you going to do? Something else. And those something else's are your alternatives. Many years ago, when my wife and I were looking for a house, this house actually, we looked at 55 houses. It took us a year. Yeah. By the end of it, we were kind of sick of houses. And finally, we found our house. It was the right house, the right neighborhood. Do we want to negotiate a good price for this house? Absolutely. But how badly do we not want to lose this house? And as soon as we become needy, we've lost all our power. So you always want to be able to go to your alternatives, even though there's going to be some sort of cost to it. So when it comes to alternatives, one, you have them. You need to know what they are. So what happened was we bought the house, and that was fine. But the problem is we hadn't sold our old house. So we had what's known in the real estate industry as two houses, okay? One of which we didn't need anymore. And this was back in 2007. Now, I don't know if you remember 2007. Let's just say it wasn't a fun time to own two houses, one of which you didn't need anymore. So we put our house on the market. In February, we got a beautiful offer, except it was not beautiful at all. It was a terrible offer. And we walked away from it and never saw the buyer again. What were alternatives? Well, we could keep owning two houses with a huge double mortgage. Could keep it on the market, try to sell it to somebody else. We could burn it down, which was very tempting. We could rent it out at a loss. We could sell our new house, move back into our old house, which would have caused marital distress and other things I don't want to even think about. And our problem was that we had literally reproduced ourselves out of our old house. It was great when there were 3 of us, but now there were 6 of us, and it's gotten a little snug, and we didn't want to move back there anymore. So we had alternatives. They were all really bad. We still needed to know what they were, and we still needed to pick one. So the one we picked was to keep it on the market and find new buyers. Now, options are those things you do with the other party. As you prepare for your negotiations, try to prepare more than one option. I mean, you're going to have the option you like. That's the one you want to present to the other party, but have some others on the side so you can bring them into the conversation. Because if all you have is one option, then you have no maneuvering room, and you become very fixed in your mindset. Listen to the other side's options, even if you hate them, because you're going to learn something. You're going to learn something about their interests. You're going to learn something about how they think. You might actually learn, be able to take pieces of their options and use them. And besides, if you don't listen to them, they're not going to listen to you. And finally, options is the place in the negotiation where you might need to get a little creative, where the option that works might be something that nobody thought of before. So finally, in June, this couple comes and they love our house. They just can't buy our house until they sell their little 2-bedroom condo. So they gave us a contingent offer, meaning they can back out and we can't. So we said no. We said, sell your condo and come back to us. We're staying on the market. A month and a half later, my broker tells me that, we're dead in the water. We've been in the market for 8.5 months. The market's going south. This was in the beginning of the mortgage crisis. It was a horrible time to try to sell a house. And I said to him, Jerry, I'm so frustrated because these people love our house. They just can't sell their little condo. What if we buy their condo? And he looked at me like I had 3 heads, but that's what we ended up doing. We sold them our house. We bought their condo. The difference covered our mortgage. And then we turned around and rented out their condo, which, unlike our house, was a good rental property. And we started making positive cash flow on it from day one. So that idea saved us, but somebody had to think of it. Somebody had to inject that bit of creative problem solving into the negotiation process. And sometimes that's going to need to be you. All right. So just a couple more thoughts. Preparing is so important. Negotiations often live and die by preparation. So in terms of preparing, know yourself. The better you know yourself, the less likely you are to, do things that you regret. Know what you care about. In this case, know what the organization or the people you represent care about as well. Know who's making the decisions and who's influencing those decisions, and also who's affected by those decisions. Very often, one of the challenges you run into in negotiation is either not talking to the right people or missing a key influencer who then decides or helps, make the decision makers go in a particular direction. Know what the other party's interests are. Gather as much information as you can, and look at that. More interests. You need to know what you're going to do if you can't come to an agreement. And one of the things that I've been into lately is coming up with checklists. There's a book called The Checklist Manifesto. It was written by Atul Gawande. And in it, he demonstrates how using checklists makes top performers perform even better, because it lets us devolve some of our wisdom onto the checklist. And now that frees up our mind to think more strategically, plus we're less likely to miss the stuff on the checklist. And finally, I think this is my last substantive slide. So just reminders, prepare before you negotiate. I've been in this business for a really long time. I mean, I've been in the negotiation field since 1995. It's amazing to me how often people either don't prepare enough, don't prepare the right information, or shockingly don't prepare at all. You get to your office, you see an email from someone you need to get in touch with, you call them up and kabang, you're in a negotiation and you haven't even read the file. Happens all the time. You're always negotiating with people. Take time to engage, take time to say hello, because you're going to find out some useful information that way. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should use them in proportion. So spend twice as much time listening as talking. Tell a story. Don't say what you want just as this is what I want. Embed it in a narrative. People hear it differently and they're more likely to respond to it. Don't forget, ask for more. Ask for what you want. Slow down and walk away if you need to. There's a lot of other resources out there. Collywobbles, that's my book. What a coincidence. It's at the very top of the list. Getting to Yes is a must read, I think. Cialdini wrote a really good book on influence, which is especially important for internal negotiations, and difficult conversations is really good for those internal negotiations as well. There are tons and tons of good resources on negotiations. If you've read these or you want others, feel free to email me. It's moshe@negotiatingtable.com. You're also all going to have this PowerPoint, right? Right, Ken? So feel free to distribute the PowerPoint. And I'm also very active on LinkedIn. I post almost every day. I do a negotiation video every couple of weeks. So if you want more interaction, more of this stuff, I do it a lot. If you do look at Collywobbles, like I said, a lot of the stuff that we talked about today does come from there. So the emotional response curve is chapter 2, negotiating styles 3, the fears and stress factors are 4 and 5, narratives, which is my favorite chapter, is chapter 6. And then the listening triangle is chapter 9, and the other side of communication is chapter 10, and managing your energy is chapter 11. So that's it. I'm going to stop sharing and just open it to conversation, questions, comments, thoughts, whatever you want to share.
Hey, this is Larry Spinello. One of the things when you were talking about buying and selling your house, I remember when I was looking to buy my house, and I'm walking in, and they're asking 1,000 questions. You like this? You like that? This? I inherently, normally, if everybody knows me, all I do is talk all the time, constant, non-stop. I can't know when to stop. My wife said, "Hey, did somebody ask you what time it is?" And they started to give the whole history of what a clock is. The thing about it is, when I was in there, it is something about money keeps me focused. I made sure. Whenever they were talking about, do you want this? Do you want that? Has this, and that? I just kept quiet. Like you said, just be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And let the pause go by. And I would say, I would go shrug my shoulders. Yeah, I definitely wanted it, but I certainly wasn't going to let them know that.
No, that's very smart.
They want up the price. I just want to throw that out to you because I totally got that.
Yeah, no, you get in trouble by talking in negotiations, not by listening, right? So a few years ago, my wife decided that she wanted a plug-in hybrid electric. So we were at this dealer looking at this plug-in hybrid electric, and my wife's a great negotiator. She's started several businesses and all that, but she was not on her game because she was just way too in love with this car. And at some point, offhandedly, the dealer asked, "So what do you drive now?" And without thinking, she said, "Oh, our car's a real shitbox." And I was like, no, because now I can no longer trade it in. I had to sell it somewhere else. So So yeah, you get in trouble by talking, not by listening. Anybody else? Any other questions, thoughts, comments? I'm just curious if you had to say, if you talk to somebody after this session and you got to tell them, oh, one thing that you might do more of, less of, or differently. I'm just curious what that might be for you.
I think the listening triangle was very helpful. It's almost like an obvious thing, but it gives you a structured it was a structured way of presenting it.
It's very obvious and very hard to do. Every single point on that triangle, it turns out, is really hard to implement. Staying open-ended, monitor yourself. You'll be stunned how often you think you're being open-ended, but you're hitting people with like 7 closed-ended questions in a row. Being non-judgmental, oh God, I have opinions and judgments about everything. So staying non-judgmental, keeping my judgments and opinions out of my questions, that's really hard. Staying silent, super hard. Actually listening is hard. Hearing the interests. When I started mediating, it took me a year to get good at hearing interests. And then remembering to reflect back, and especially reframing, those are really hard skills. So I kind of think of it like the game Othello, a moment to learn, a lifetime to master. What I suggest to people is pick one thing, pick a low-hanging fruit. If, let's say, silence is hard for you, just work on that for a bit, or staying open-ended, just work on that for a bit. Once you feel like, okay, that's better, then add in some other piece of it. Great, thanks, Robert. Anybody else?
Joyce made a comment early in
Maggie,
the presentation about being very conscious of her tendencies with emotional response and the pace. And so that was a thing that I took away as well. It's to set goals for myself on that curve in different situations.
Yeah, and we're so different on those things. I mean, I have 4 kids. My 2 middle sons are only 15 months apart. Could not be more different. One of them is extremely volatile. He'll just like, and then like 3 seconds later, he's perfectly calm again. The other one is much slower to get upset, but then he harbors grudges for years, right? So, we're all different, and plus we tend to be different in different circumstances. So really being mindful of these things, it's the awareness that really helps. Joyce, go ahead.
I was going to say, I really appreciate the triangle. It's very close to what we teach in our learning dynamics classes for instructors about active listening, and we actually practice it. And so having taught that class so many times, I practice it conscientiously when I enter into any area in which I'm negotiating. The best experience I ever had was when obviously the other party practiced it too. We had scheduled a 2-hour a meeting to go over some contract things. It lasted 5 minutes because we both literally were, we kind of talked about it afterwards when, active listening, right? And I'm like, yep. It was like interesting where you immediately recognize the impact and the power of that. And so It was probably the best 2 hours afterwards being, hey, let's go to eat now because we're done.
That's awesome. And the listening triangle really is just a focused version of active listening that is tailored to drawing out people's interest during a negotiation. That's all it is, really. Well, I'm going to formally end my part of the program. I'm happy to hang out and listen to you, network, and participate and answer any questions or anything anybody wants to do. But I also want to respect people's time. It's 7:30 here, and I think this is our end time. So I wanted to thank you all for your questions, comments, and engagement. And I hope you got some value out of this. And good luck in your negotiations.
Thank you, Moshe. You did a great job. So for a couple of things. One, we're going to send you a gift card. It's going to come from Sandeep Guar, Amazon. He's our board of director person that does the awards. So it's not spam when you see from Sandeep, and it's Amazon.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing. Thank you so much for a great presentation, as always, amazing. And for everybody else, I did post the links for where this recording will show up. It's probably not going to show up for a day or two along with the PowerPoint because everything's volunteer. We're all volunteers. We don't get paid. So, we just have to find time to put it up there. But the link is in chat. You have to copy it now, because if you don't copy it now, you won't see it later when you close your meeting. The other thing is the CEU certificate and the survey. We want to hear back from you. Those links are there. So please check it out. That's important. And the last thing is, so we're going to hang out for anyone who wants to network. I'm going to stop recording right now. So anyone who's shy who wants to ask questions is sort of like after an in-person presentation and people want to go up and they're afraid to ask during the meeting, but they want to walk up and talk to the speaker. Well, you can do that now. So I'm going to stop recording.